And should I just dive into questions?
Yeah, so let me go in order and read them to you. We have a question. You've mentioned values and aligning your intent with your values. Do you cover values in the book, as some may not have done that work to know their values?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a terrific question. I do cover this. There's a section in the book about how to turn your values into time. That's really the goal here. Well, a lot of people ask, well, how do I know what my values are? Do I have to do some visioning board exercise or some 5-year plan? No. Here's what you have to do. It's actually much simpler than that. Instead of having these big lofty goals, and this oftentimes gets people in trouble because they say, well, how do I make time to figure out my values? And then they don't do anything, nothing changes. Instead of these big heavy work processes to figure out what your values are, I have a much simpler way. And that is to start by first and foremost understanding, what does that mean? What are values? What's the definition of values? The definition of values are attributes of the person you want to become. Okay, let me say that again. Values are defined as attributes of the person you want to become. So what we do is we ask ourselves, how would the person I want to become spend their time? And so what we do is we look at these 3 life domains. So we have 3 life domains. It starts with the center is you. Okay, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. So first you have you in the center, then you have your relationships, and then you have your work. Most people, if they keep any sort of a calendar, they only think of the work domain, but that's actually what you should think of last. First, start with, how would the person you want to become spend their time taking care of themselves? So that means time spent exercising, time spent in prayer, meditation, reading, learning, playing video games, for all I care. It doesn't matter how you want to spend your time. The fact is that you do it with forethought, with intent, as I talked about in the presentation. So first we start with the you domain, and I want you to make sure you have that time in your calendar. You know, if taking care of your physical health is important, when you ask people, oh, what do you value in life? Oh, health is number one. Well, do you have that time in your calendar to make sure you have proper rest, proper nutrition, proper exercise? If not, you're not turning your values into time. Okay, so start with that question. How would the person I want to become spend their day? So that's the first category, the first life domain. Next is your relationships. So, you know, we have a loneliness epidemic in the United States, actually worldwide these days, because people don't have the regular structure in their lives to interact with other people like they used to. Let alone now that we're struggling with COVID and we don't get to see our friends like we used to, it's even more important to schedule time in your day to see the important people in your life, whether that's a Zoom call with your parents, whether that's a check-in with your friends, time dedicated to your kids. That time, it turns out, doesn't happen if we don't plan for it. And frankly, it's not fair that the people we love most get whatever scraps of time are left over after we do work. Right? Plan the time for your friends as well, based again on that principle. How would the person I want to become spend their time every day? Is it half an hour with your kids? Is it lunch with your significant other? Put that time in your calendar. The next step is the work domain. Now, work falls in 2 types of categories. We have what we call reactive work and reflective work. Most people, unfortunately, spend most of their day doing reactive work. Reactive work is the emails, the Slack messages, the phone calls. You're reacting to stuff all day long. And that is definitely part of our work day. Clearly, we need time to react to the emails and the phone calls and all those messages. That has to be part of our day. But what people don't realize is that most of their day is spent doing reactive work because it's easy. It feels urgent. It feels important. And so we feel productive even if we are not making time for the most important work in our day. The most important work is the reflective work. Because if you don't have that time for reflective work, you're running real fast in the wrong direction. So if you don't have time planned in your day, even if it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour to think, then you are missing a huge opportunity. So make time in your day. I understand it's not going to be your whole day. You have to be ready for clients and bosses and et cetera, things like that. But make at least some part of your day reserved and protected for reflective work. You know, there's a reason we call it paying attention. We pay attention just like we pay with dollars and cents. And so you wouldn't stand on a street corner and say, oh, who wants my money? Here, have money. Take all my money for free. And yet we do that with our time all the time, right? We pay attention to whoever wants our attention as opposed to protecting it. Just like we protect our money by putting it in a bank, we need to protect our time by planning ahead. So that's how we figure out our values. We ask ourselves, what are the attributes of the person I want to become? How would the person I want to become spend their time? And we plan our day according to those values. Now, that might seem like a lot of work. It's actually not. It takes 15 minutes a week. Okay, it's very simple. Once you get the hang of it, I gave you that link earlier at the schedule maker tool I built. There was another question someone asked around what kind of tools I recommend. That's a very simple tool I built. Anybody can use. It's totally free. You don't have to sign up for anything. But I use Google Calendar. So I do this in my calendar. You can use Microsoft Outlook, whatever you use. It doesn't really matter. You can do it with pen and paper as long as you are planning out your time for the week ahead. And if that seems like too much, oh, I can't plan my entire week, fine. How about just tomorrow? Heck, how about just an afternoon of time where we're going to say, here's how we're going to spend our time. And again, it's not just about the worky, productive stuff. It's also about the things you enjoy, right? Time dedicated to your family, time dedicated to yourself. If you want to play video games for an hour or scroll Facebook, do it. But make sure that time is held in place, because when you do that, you are turning a distraction into traction by planning for it.
Speaking of planning and scheduling, have you found in your research that there's a best time of day to create your plan?
Yeah, so this is very dependent on the person. It doesn't really matter what time of day you do it. Just make sure you have that time in your schedule. So for me, I'll tell you personally, I have time in my calendar every Sunday evening. It takes me about 15 minutes, and that's the time when I look at my schedule for the week ahead and I compare it to the week that just went by. And by simply looking at, okay, where did I get distracted? And I still get distracted from time to time. The goal of being indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. I made up the term indistractable, so I can define it any way I want. And so being indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. The difference between someone who is indistractable and someone who is distractible is that the distractible person keeps making the same mistakes. They keep getting distracted by the same thing week after week after week without doing anything about it. And so, there's a great quote by Paulo Coelho who said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So if you get distracted by something once, no problem. An indistractable person learns from that experience and figures out ways to make their schedule easier to follow in the week ahead. So the purpose of a time box schedule is not to be a drill sergeant and beat yourself up if you fall off track. It's to be a scientist and to learn from it and say, okay, how did I go off track? Was it because of an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem? Okay, so only 3 potential reasons why we might get distracted. So which one of those was it? And how can I prevent it from happening in the week ahead? So for me, it's a 15-minute weekly practice every Sunday night, but for you, it can be any time of day you like, as long as that time is protected on your calendar to review your week ahead.
And in regards to scheduling again, how much buffer time would you recommend scheduling per day, given how much unforeseen things tend to happen?
Yeah, so buffer time is really about figuring out, it's a great question, and it's something that's very, very valuable. For those who don't know what that means, if you think about how, there are many things in life that we have a varying degree of control over. And many people blame those things as something that there's no way to control. And many times it turns out if we think about it, we actually have more control than we think. Let me give you a great example. One of the classic examples of an excuse that people make as to why they didn't do what they said they would do, or why they didn't show up on time, why they didn't fulfill their commitment, is traffic. Not right now because of COVID. Many people are working from home, but you've heard this before. Oh, I was stuck in traffic. I couldn't make the meeting. Or, oh, I wanted to work on the presentation, but I got stuck in traffic. Well, doesn't traffic happen like pretty much every day? Like, this is not a new thing, right? Traffic was not simply, invented out of nowhere. We have some ability to predict the likelihood of traffic, right? So what do? We build in buffer time. We know, like, if you had a date with, a celebrity that you admired, or, a lunch meeting with Bill Gates or somebody that you really wanted to sit down with, wouldn't you plan ahead and say, oh my gosh, I have got to be there on time because, my hero is waiting for me? Well, why do we not make that same type of priority for ourselves? Whether it's going to the gym, whether it's showing up to a meeting on time, whether it's playing with our kids, we need to hold ourselves accountable by building in a little bit of buffer room. So it's really dependent on what that experience is, right? If traffic takes you anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic, well, then you can build a little buffer time into your schedule. The idea here is that we want to focus on the things we can control so that when the things happen that we really can't control, the things that are really outside our hands, COVID happens. Okay, that you didn't control that, right? But a person who has a time box calendar and builds in that buffer time in their day and gets more done that they say they would actually, gets more things done that they say they will actually do, that's the kind of person who can adjust more easily in their life because they have this regular practice of building these time box calendars. So we would sit down, we would say, okay, what's changed in my life? What's different now that wasn't different before? And we make that adjustment for the week ahead.
Great. And speaking of getting things done, what is your thought about getting things done process?
Yeah, so I love the getting things done methodology. What I don't love is how most people misinterpret it. Most people they read they don't read Getting Things Done, the book. They heard from a friend that getting things done is as simple as just putting things on a to-do list. And that's actually not the essence of the book. He actually talks about how important it is to put that time in your schedule as well. And so we are very much aligned, but most people don't actually make it all the way through the book. They read the Cliff Notes version and they think, okay, just put everything on a to-do list. And that actually really does backfire. I hate to-do lists. Now, there's nothing wrong with a temporary register of the things you need to get done, but you need to immediately put that on your calendar. Don't let your to-do list be your guide for the day. That's the problem. Like when people think of to-do lists, they start their day, they sit down at work and they say, okay, what do I have to do today? Here's my list of 1,000 things I have to get done. And they basically tick those things off. And here's why it's so toxic. Number one, what most people do, what I used to do when I kept a to-do list was, you start work. Oh, I just need to get started. My coffee hasn't really kicked in. What do? You do the easy stuff, right? Not the important stuff. You do the easy stuff. And so that happens. You do enough easy stuff. Now you're getting tired. Well, you can't do the hard stuff anymore. So you never get to the really important stuff. So you do the easy or the urgent at the expense of the important. The second reason it's so bad is that it reinforces this self-image day after day. If you don't finish everything on your to-do list, then what happens is that your psyche begins to accept that it's okay to not do what you said you're going to do. And that is toxic. That is cancer for your productivity. So if you guide your day based on a to-do list and you don't finish everything on your to-do list and you measure your productivity based on how much you finished on your to-do list, you are setting yourself up for disaster. As opposed to a time box calendar, the metric for success is not checking little boxes that make you feel good. It's about, did you work on what you said you would work on without distraction for as long as you said you would? That's it. It's not about output. It's about input. Did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? That is the only metric. Whether it's being with your kids, whether it's playing a video game, whether it's working on a big presentation, it doesn't matter. Did I do what I said I was going to do in advance for as long as I said I would? And the amazing thing is, if you do that, you will actually be more productive. Studies find that people who use the time boxing technique get more done than the people who use the to-do list technique. So it's by far a much, much better technique to use than just letting your day be guided by a list of to-dos. By the way, there's one other additional benefit, which is that people who run their life based on to-do lists, they have no idea what real leisure feels like. This is a big, big problem. That people who run their life on to-do lists, like I used to, even when we get home from work, and we just want to relax, we just want to watch Netflix, we just want to play with our kids, we just want to chill out, we have this guilt in the back of our minds that, oh, I didn't finish everything on my to-do list. There's more stuff that needs to get done, because of course we never finish our to-do list. And so we can't, even when we plan time for leisure, we can't even fully enjoy it because we're constantly thinking about, oh, what else needs to get done? And so that doesn't happen with a time box calendar. When you become indistractable, what you are doing at the end of the day is exactly what you planned. I plan to watch a movie on Netflix. I plan to play video games. I plan to be with my kids. Anything else right now would be a distraction. So you can enjoy leisure fully. And I think very few people these days have felt the amazing joy and freedom of doing leisure right, of actually enjoying the time you planned to not do work, as opposed to people who are constantly, busy with to-do lists. They're always thinking about work and they never really get time to relax.
That's so true. Um, we have another question. Have you found in your research if there's a difference in planning using written tools like a planner book versus digital tools?
Yeah, so this is really up to you. Some people find that it's better to have something that is non-digital, that is fully analog. And so I've worked with a lot of people who really prefer to have a written notebook. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be a spiral-bound notebook where you're just jotting down, you just put down your 24 hours in your day, or if you want to skip the sleep part, that's fine too. But make sure you have that time scheduled for a bedtime at least. But if you say, okay, I wake up at 7 a.m. and I go to sleep at 10 or 11, okay, you can just jot down those numbers on the page and plan your day accordingly with the paper system. I prefer using, an online calendar. I use Google Calendar. You can use that schedule maker tool I talked about earlier at that link. Whatever, the important part isn't the tool. It's whatever you will consistently use, right? So whatever is easiest for you is the right tool.
Got it. And does waking up early play any part of one's traction?
That's really up to you. There's been a lot of, I think people tend to look for like these magic bullets of, oh, if you wake up early, if you take a cold shower, the research doesn't back up that stuff. Everything in Indistractable is really important for me, not only that it works, right? I use every single one of the techniques I talk about in the book, and we only had a chance to cover a small fraction of all the techniques and strategies I talk about, but everything I use myself, but also it was really important for me that it wasn't just an idiosyncratic technique that only works for me. Everything in the book is backed by peer-reviewed studies. So you'll see in Indistractable, there are 30 pages of citations from peer-reviewed journals. It was really important to me that it wasn't, just a personal pet project. These are backed by good research over, decades. I didn't make up time boxing. It's been around forever. The psychologists call it making an implementation intention. So they always have fancy words for things, but that's basically all it is. So it's I don't recommend, the stuff that doesn't have much good research. And there's a lot of kind of bogus techniques out there that people say, oh, that's the secret. If waking up early for you works, if that's effective for you, put it on your calendar, give it a shot, try it out. And if you find that that's what helps you minimize those internal triggers and external triggers because people aren't around in the morning and they're not bugging you with those phone calls, do it. It's really about planning out that time in advance. It's really about intent. And so there's no magic secret to waking up early, but if you find that works in your life, go for it.
Awesome. And then we have a reader of your book who says, in your book, you state that willpower is not a finite resource, but sometimes it just doesn't feel that way after a really long, stressful day. Do you have any tips on how to keep up willpower even when the going gets super tough?
Yeah. So Indistractable is full of unconventional wisdom in that there's a lot of advice out there in the self-help community, whether it's espoused by books or whether just people kind of pass it on from one person to another, that is wrong, like dead wrong. One of the myths out there is that willpower is a finite resource, that you run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And this actually got some scientific credibility. There was a few years ago a book about this, and there was a particular research that claimed to have studies that he did that showed that you run out of willpower, that he showed these studies where if he gave people a difficult math problem and then he gave them lemonade, that somehow they were better able to keep doing these difficult math problems because their willpower was rejuiced and re-energized. Turns out that, as many times happens in the social sciences, when a study sounds too good to be true, we replicate it, right? This is the scientific process. We do the study again. And when other researchers tried to replicate these experiments, they found that it wasn't true, that they couldn't replicate the results. except for in one group of people. There was one group of people who really did experience what we call ego depletion. They really did run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And those people, the one group of people who really did experience this effect where they ran out of willpower, were only the people who believed that willpower was a finite resource. So if you believed that willpower was finite and that you would run out of it, you acted in accordance to your belief. And you really did run out of willpower. And I would do this to myself. I didn't know at the time that it was called ego depletion and about the controversial research, but I used to do this all the time. I'd come home from work and I'd say, oh, I've had such a hard day. I don't have any more self-control. I don't have any more willpower. Give me that pint of Ben and Jerry's. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix for a bit, right? I'm spent. And that was only happening because I had this conception in my mind that I was spent. And of course, I lived in accordance with that belief. And so this is why it's so important to understand how many of us carry around these self-defeating notions of our capabilities. And I talk about this in a chapter in the book about how we have to reimagine our temperament. You know, the type of things we say to ourselves. Oh, I have a short attention span, right? How many people have that notion? I have an addictive personality. I'm not good at focusing very much. I'm scatterbrained. I'm always late. We carry around these ideas. And of course, if you believe them, you will act in accordance with that belief. And so it's absolutely critical that we understand these identities, these beliefs that hurt us, and sometimes the ones that serve us. And according to this question, just so I make sure I answer it, the idea here is, well, if willpower isn't a finite resource, well, then what is it? And what do we do about it? Well, what we now know, there's a researcher by the name of Michael Inslich who proposes that willpower is not like gas in a gas tank. Willpower is nothing more than an emotion. And so just like we don't run out of happy, we don't run out of sadness. We don't run, if you're in an argument with somebody and you're feeling emotional, you're angry at them, you're not angry and then, oh, I ran out of anger. Okay, I'm not angry anymore. No, it doesn't work that way. Anger is an emotion, right? And so running out of willpower works the same way. It's an emotion. It crests and subsides. And so when we understand that and we use some of these techniques that I talked about earlier, like surfing the urge, for example, like the 10-minute rule, there's all these techniques that we can use to help us understand that lack of motivation is a temporary emotion, right? And it's something that we can learn to deal with just like we would deal with any internal trigger. That willpower is, in fact, just an emotion.
I love that. I'm gonna probably write that on my phone and just keep it around. Another question is, how do you use the time box method when your schedule needs to change a lot? And this comes from a small business owner, and a lot of the folks in this call are.
Yeah.
So they're in sales and they're meeting potential clients. They're abiding by different people's schedules all the time. So how do you work around other schedules?
Totally. So I'm one of the few academics who actually has been in door-to-door sales. My first job out of college was in a consulting firm, and then I started a solar energy business. And I used to dial for dollars, just like the best of them. I had a small business, and when it was just two people in this company, I had to do the door-to-door sales, and I had to do the phone calls, and I know how difficult it can be. And this is actually incredibly applicable to people who are running their own businesses, because if you think about it, running your business is full of internal triggers. There's stress, anxiety, boredom, fatigue. It's hard to call people and make sales calls. It's hard to do customer service all day long. It's very emotionally taxing, right? It's something that is difficult for us to do. And so many times we avoid doing it through procrastination, through distraction. And so that's why it's so important to understand these internal triggers of why we go off track. It's never just about the thing we really need to get done right now. It's about what emotion are we escaping. And so when it comes to schedules that change frequently, it's even more important to plan ahead, because if we don't, then we will always succumb to the urgent at the expense of the important. And I see this all the time with small businesses. That, oh, this customer just needs this one thing. We've got to get on it right away. Or, oh, this employee has to have this. And so we have to do that right away. And so we always do the urgent and we never have time for the important. Because again, if you're really good at responding to the urgent and you have no time for the important, you're running real fast in the wrong direction. So I'm not advocating that your entire day needs to be in focused Zen mode all day long. No, what I'm saying is that you can't only do reactive work, which means that some proportion of your day, even if it's 30 minutes, an hour, needs to be saved and protected for that reflective work. Even if the rest of your day is reactive, okay, that's fine. You're doing customer service, you're handling employees, got it. That's fine. But sometime in your day needs to be set aside and protected religiously for that reflective work. Because again, if you don't do that, how do you know you're running in the right direction? So being really productive and efficient, doing the wrong stuff is just as bad as doing nothing. It's even worse than doing nothing because you have to dig yourself out of the wrong path. So make sure you have that time protected in your day, at least some amount to focus, to think, to plan ahead, to strategize. And that can only be done without distraction.
I love that. Taking power over your schedule. Um, I know we're 1 minute over time. Could we get one more question
Sure.
in?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, one last question. If you do get distracted, what do you suggest to pull yourself back on track, or is it better to continue on the distraction?
Okay, yeah, great question. So one of the techniques I talk about in the book, we didn't have time to talk about it today during the webinar, but one of the techniques we do, one of the first things we do is that we keep what's called a distraction tracker. So in the book, there's this little register that you can write down what you got distracted from and what was the source of that distraction. Because remember, every distraction only has three potential causes. It's either an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. And so this is something we do in the beginning that helps us identify, oh, I plan to do X, but I did Y. Why did I do that? And so over time, what we're doing, as we talked about earlier, we can set systems in place so that we don't keep getting distracted by the same thing again and again and again. We do something about it so that next time we don't get distracted again by the same thing. So in the moment, if you say, oh, I was going to work on that big project, but oh, here I am checking email, or here I am checking my phone, or whatever it might be, what you want to do is as quickly as possible to recognize that you got off track. Write down, if you can, just for a quick second, write down what it was you planned to do, what you did instead, and then get back to the thing you plan to do. Later on, what you're going to do is make some time for reflection and say, okay, I plan to work on that big project, but I got a phone call. Okay, what am I going to do next time to make sure I can make that I can make it easier to do what I said I was going to do? Right? Was it an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem? And now I can fix that system so that next time that won't occur. So I won't get distracted next time. But in the moment, if you do go off track, you want to bring yourself back to doing the thing you said you were going to do as quickly as possible.
I love that. I feel like we're all going to be more in control of our willpower, our schedule, our distractions, and be on track to being on traction. Thank you so much for your time